So hi everyone, thanks again for joining us today, and thank you Zoe for speaking. It's great to have you back for another event. So Zoe is a compassionate career coach who creates space for individuals to explore their career goals and potential. Navigating her own career journey allowed Zoe to develop a broader understanding of the challenges career change and exploration presents. She provides individuals with the understanding and support they need to be successful, and her coaching focuses on building effective tools for job searching, developing soft skills, and building confidence. Zoe's educational background is in psychology, career development practitioning, and adult education. Professionally, she has worked with individuals from varying backgrounds, from healthcare to hospitality to media arts, and most recently, trades and technology. Thanks again for presenting today, Zoe, and good luck.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. Hi, everyone. So as Alex mentioned already, I'm a career coach with General Assembly. Currently, I'm working really closely with our software development program and our user experience design program, but we also have programs in data science, digital marketing, product design, lots of other things. So you can check us out. I'm going to be focusing on behavioral interviews for us today and just taking us through what that means, what they look like, what kind of questions you can expect, how to answer them, and different tips to share with you for preparing and practicing. So to get started today, again, we're going to be discussing behavioral interviews. We're going to talk about what kind of strategies you can apply to better prepare yourself for these interviews and what the STORE method is. So if you're not familiar with it, we're going to go through that in detail because that's what you want to be using to be answering all of your behavioral interview questions. We'll talk about how to practice and prepare with using that. So what are behavioral interview questions? So this is when an interviewer actually asks you to recall a past experience and walk them through how you handle them. So you're drawing on your own experience to answer these questions and provide an example. These are used to accurately assess your soft skills. So you probably spend a lot of time preparing your technical skills, studying up on technical assessments, practicing things like that. But what's really important is practicing these behavioral interview questions and answers as well, because employers really listen for your soft skills. These are just as important. What we hear from employers all of the time, and what you might have even heard from some of the employers here at the session today, is that they can provide the mentorship and the training needed for some of those tech skills that you might not be coming in with, but they can't really do that for the soft skills as well. So it's really important to be assessing these when they interview candidates. So for example, we have, tell me about a time that you were asked to do something you had never done before. How did you react and what did you learn? So a couple parts to that question. We're going to take a look at it in a little bit more detail in a moment. But for now, I want to look at some other examples to share with you. So I'm going to read the question and then we're going to look at what recruiters actually listen for when they're asking this question. So the first one being, tell me about a time when you had to adjust to a colleague's working style in order to complete a project. So maybe an example of a time that you were working with someone that you didn't have the same working style as, maybe your personalities didn't fit perfectly, different working styles, different organizational styles, you were prioritizing parts of the project differently, and it was just maybe a little bit of conflict, things weren't moving the way that you wanted to. So what recruiters really listen for here is your adaptability, flexibility, ability to reflect on what was learned, and teamwork and collaboration. So they really want to hear about how did you handle this situation, what steps did you take in order to rectify it, and what was the end result? Of course, hopefully a positive one that you should be sharing with them. Next, we see, can you tell us about a time a project dramatically shifted direction in the last minute? What did you do? So what recruiters are listening for here is a focus on keeping the project on track to meet the deadline, comfort in seeking assistance when you need it, and communication. They want to know, again, how do you handle this kind of situation? What kind of steps do you take in order to make sure that you're putting the project deadline first, and how you're meeting it when a situation like this pops up? Another example here is, tell me about a time that you had to juggle several projects at the same time. How did you organize your time and what was the result? So again, what recruiters are listening for is a clear, proactive process for organization. So whether it's to-do lists for you, confirming deadlines, blocking time in your calendar, however it is that you choose to organize things like this, they're listening for what kind of steps you take for yourself and how you kind of use those steps to check in with the team and make sure that everyone's on the same page and that you can handle all of those projects and all of those different deadlines at the same time. And of course, the success in meeting all of those deadlines. Something else we want to do and understand when we're preparing for behavioral interviews is understanding the question as an opportunity. So if we look at an example of, tell me about a time when a project or initiative you worked on was unsuccessful, we want to hear and use this question as an opportunity to share what we've learned and how we've grown. So this is an opportunity to share that you're self-reflective, self-aware, and have a sense of personal responsibility and learn from the experience. It can be a really uncomfortable question to be asked and to answer as well. That's not one that someone typically likes to answer. We don't like to go into an interview and maybe talk about our failures or things that have gone wrong in the past. We're usually there, of course, to talk about our successes and talk about how we can be such a great fit and show off a little bit, right? So this can be a tricky question to answer. But what you want to do is allow yourself to be vulnerable. Employers want to hear about how you handle these situations, what it is that you learned from them, being really vulnerable in them and self-reflective and proving to them like, hey, this happens to everybody and this is what I learned in this situation, and moving forward, this is what I did to make sure that this didn't happen again. And also how you communicate with your team. There's lots of variables that they're listening for here. What you don't want to do is avoid the question by saying that you've never worked on an unsuccessful project. This has happened, again, to everybody. That sometime, somewhere out there was a project that you worked on, whether it was in school, whether it was in a job many years ago, maybe it was recent, whenever it was. Unfortunately, it just happens sometimes. So don't place the blame on other people. Don't be self-deprecating. Don't feel a sense of shame about the experience. Again, happens to everybody. And don't be too hard on yourself. So explain to them the situation, explain what you learned from it, and what you did moving forward to make sure that it didn't happen again. So again, you want to make sure that you find that opportunity in every question, even the really uncomfortable ones, so that we're putting our best foot forward and sharing as many possible skills as we can with them during this process. So what if you don't understand the question? Sometimes this happens, could be for any reason. Maybe it was just an awkward question, or maybe you didn't hear them, whatever it was, or maybe they're asking you something that you genuinely don't know. Ask them to repeat it. Ask them to clarify parts of it. So ask lots of questions. It's okay to be asking questions throughout your interview too. Make it as conversational as you can. You don't want to try and stumble through the question and assume that you know what they're talking about, or assume that you'll figure it out as you go, or assume that your answer will be okay. If you need clarification, ask for it. They'll be more than happy to provide that. Especially if you go back to some of those questions that we saw previously where there's a couple different parts to them. If you get halfway through your answer and you're like, oh, I only remember the first part, I can't remember what else they asked me, and I'm not sure if my answer is enough, ask them to repeat the question for you. If you're halfway through your answer, again, ask them to repeat part of the question, and don't lie if you're not sure, of course. So don't try and fib some kind of answer for them. If you're unsure of the situation and you've never come across it, we're going to talk about how to answer that as well in a couple slides. So how do we actually answer behavioral interview questions? Using the STAR method. So this stands for situation, task, action, and result. So the situation, of course, being when you get asked that question, you're going to describe what the circumstances were. What was the challenge that you were faced with? What was the situation that was happening that you had to navigate? Second, you want to make sure you identify what the task is. So what are the goals that you are working towards? Next, you're going to talk about the action. So what did you specifically do to address the challenge? So if you think back to that question of how did you handle working with a colleague whose personality was different from your own, explain the situation. How were your personalities different? What was happening in that situation where you maybe weren't working well together, or you had conflicting ideas, or whatever it was? Describe what that situation was. What's the task? What is it that you two are working towards? What's the deadline? What kind of project are you working on? What do you need to do to get there? Talk about your actions. So what did you do? So maybe if you notice that you have different working styles, you communicate that with your colleague and you talk to them. You say, hey, I really like to organize things this way. I notice that you like to do it this way. Can we maybe meet in the middle and figure out a way to communicate better about what needs to get done so we can meet this result? And lastly, of course, talk about what the result was. This seems common sense, but it's really, really important to make sure that you're answering with an example that has a solid result, something positive. It seems common sense, but there's been a lot of times where I'm practicing with students and in the moment they're like, you know what, here's an example. And they start going through this question, and at the end that you see they're kind of like, oh no. And it turns out that the result at the end of the example that they started sharing actually wasn't a good one. The conflict wasn't resolved, or they missed the deadline, or something happened that wasn't actually positive. So prepare ahead of time so that you actually know what kind of examples you're going to be giving, so you don't run into that situation, because you really want to make sure that you're showing off at the end and providing an example that really highlights your strengths, what you learned, and a really positive result at the end. So preparing and practicing, become fluent in use. So again, practice speaking out loud and writing about your professional story and your value proposition. Go through a ton of behavioral interview questions that are really common. You can do a quick search on Google about common interview questions in your field, take a list from the internet and write out some answers for yourself, and practice different examples that you could be sharing. Practice with your peers, practice with family, reach out to a career coach if you have one, practice with past colleagues, hiring managers that you've worked with in the past, things like that. Be ready to quickly pull from your professional story and recall specific career accomplishments and achievements at any time, and as well as any metrics and data that you can use to serve as evidence for those achievements. That's really important too. Numbers are important in your story. And then again, of course, research and practice answering some of those common interview questions. You can pull some of them from the slide, and again, you can do a quick Google search and find lots that are relevant to your field. If you're unsure about how to answer common interview questions, ask someone for guidance, reach out to people who work at the company. Networking is a great way to reach out to people who are working at a company that you might be interested and learn more from them about what their interview experience was like. Glassdoor even has great resources on interview reviews. You can find some examples of questions there. But again, networking can be huge in helping you prepare for that interview. So some pro tips: take notes and have questions prepared. Make sure you're asking questions at the end of your interview. It is so important to make sure that at the end you're showing your interest in the company by asking questions and showing that you want to learn more about them and what they're all about. Mirror their vocal tone, speed, volume, and posture. This can be kind of hard to do over Zoom, but you can get a pretty good sense for what the vibe of the interview is and what kind of tone they're using. In phone interviews, this might sound weird as well, but think about your posture and smile. You can actually hear this when you're conducting phone interviews. People get really comfortable when they're at home. You know that no one can see you when you're on the phone, and sometimes people start to slouch if you're laying down. You can sometimes hear when people are just a little bit too relaxed. So treat it like a real in-person interview, even though it might be on the phone or on Zoom. If you need time, just ask for it. The 10 seconds to pause and think is so important. So again, going back to that example of making sure you have a positive result to share at the end of your answer, a lot of times the reason that people get to the end of their answer and realize they're sharing a really bad example is because they didn't take that time to pause and think. They didn't actually have an example prepared for that question. They dove into an answer before they actually had a chance to think about it, and now they're stuck with trying to fumble through this answer that they don't actually have an end to, or they realize isn't a great outcome to be sharing. So it's way better to actually pause and think, figure out what it is that you want to say, pull on some really great experience to share with them, and don't rush into your answer. Never use just, so don't devalue yourself by saying, oh, I was just responsible for this part or just responsible for this part. Be confident in what pieces you were responsible for if you're sharing team experience. Also use I and not we again when talking about team experience. So it's common to just get into that habit of saying, you know, we did this, because you're talking about a team experience, but we really want to learn about what it is that you were responsible for. So use I and talk a lot about what it is that you were responsible for. Do some industry and company research, reference different trends. Don't wait until the end to ask for questions. So again, pop some questions throughout the interview as much as you can, and make sure that you close the interview and of course follow up with them afterwards. So what kind of tips can we share with others to prepare for these interviews? So how to prepare. Review the job description and the requirements. This is so important. And make sure that when you're applying to jobs that you're saving these applications. You know which jobs you've been applying to. If you're someone that's sending out tons of applications, sometimes it can get really hard to track which ones you've sent out. And say it takes the company a month or two to actually get back to you about an application you submitted. You want to be able to recall what it is that you actually applied to. So try and save that for yourself somewhere and track that, and reference the job description requirements during your interview as much as you can. Make sure that you know what it is that they're asking of you so you can try and hit all of those skills and requirements with your answers. Also review your own resume, past projects, recall on challenges, events, projects that you can talk about from your past experience. And again, make sure that you're actually relating those to the job description and the requirements. Create some sample questions and find some past ones online that you can prepare and practice, and network and reach out to people who work there again, and ask them about their interview and hiring experience, see if there's any tips that they can share for you. Probing questions are really important as well. So this is something that interviewers will do if the answer maybe doesn't meet their needs. So say you answer one of their questions, but you didn't really give enough detail and they didn't get a full grasp of what it is that you're explaining to them or telling them about. They might use probing questions to get a little bit more information out of you. So they'll be asking these kind of questions because there's something missing, or they want to dig a little bit deeper, they want to learn a little bit more. This is an opportunity for you to fill in any gaps and provide more information for them. If they are not asking probing questions, it doesn't unfortunately necessarily mean that your answer was perfect. Now, it totally can be. Maybe your answer is great, they got everything that they needed and they're going to move on. Or they might just not be asking these questions because they're going to allow for those holes to stay in your answer, which is really unfortunate. So if there are any, and if you notice this, sometimes you can notice it just by facial expression. If they look like they're a little bit confused, if they didn't take too many notes compared to some of your other answers and things like that, ask them. Did I answer that in enough detail? Would you like another example? If you don't feel like you have the opportunity to do this after some of your questions, you can also ask that at the end. So sometimes at the very end of your interview, a great question to ask is, based on all the information that I provided for you today, do you think I'm a good fit for this role? Is there anything else that you would like to know about my experience? Those are great questions to make sure that there's nothing missed. It gives you another opportunity to share something else. If there was maybe something that you really wanted to highlight for them, but the right question didn't pop up for you to highlight that, asking that kind of question at the end of your interview can be really helpful as well. So when you can't answer the question, so respond with something like, I actually don't have experience with this, but here's something similar. So you don't want to ever just say, I don't know, I've never done that before, or I don't know, I've never experienced that, or that hasn't happened to me. You got to give them more. So demonstrate to them, maybe it hasn't happened to you specifically, but here's something very similar that is comparable that I can share with you to demonstrate still how I would handle a situation like that. You can also say, don't have experience with this, but here's how I would find the answer. So again, if you don't have something that can compare to it, maybe talk about, if it's a tech stack that you need to learn or some kind of skill that you don't have that you need to learn and you don't have experience with it, how can you find it and how can you learn it? So tell them about how you would find answers that you need, how you would seek guidance from different people. If you're looking at the job description and you go, I have all of these skills except for maybe one. And then you get to the interview and they say, hey, what's your skill set like with this very specific skill? And you don't have it and you think that it's going to come up in the interview, get ahead of it. Try and check out some free tutorials on YouTube, see if there's any kind of courses you can take, see if you can teach yourself how to use it, or whatever it is that you might be missing that you want to include and that they're asking for. That's really important to do too. So make sure that when you're answering a question that you don't think you have an answer to, you're providing them with something else. So either an example that's similar or explaining to them how you would find the answer for that. Awesome. So closing the interview. Prepare questions to ask at the end, sorry. So thank them for their time, tell them that you appreciate the opportunity and the opportunity to chat with them and learn more about the position. And then you can also, again, say, based on the answers I provided, is there anything else you would like to know about myself or my experience? Is there anything that I haven't spoken about that makes you think I might not be a good fit? Can kind of feel like an uncomfortable question to ask, but it's going to give you a really straightforward answer on how the interview went and what you can expect from next steps. Following up. So when you should follow up. So if it's just an application, we say 1 week. After your interview, make sure it's within 24 hours. So send a thank you note, restate your interest in the role, and hopefully hear back from them really soon. So some things to remember: prepare and practice. Use that STAR method when answering questions. Remember the situation, task, action, and result. Make sure it's a good result. Be concise and don't ramble. Remember back to taking that 10-second pause before you answer the question. This can be really helpful in making sure that you organize your thoughts. You know exactly what example you're pulling on. You know what it is that you're going to say, and you don't rush into an answer without having it organized for yourself, and you don't ramble through it. Listen and respond accordingly. Remember that if you are unsure of what it is that they're asking, that you're asking lots of questions, ask for clarification, ask for more details. Sometimes those small details can totally change the answer that you would have provided, so that's important to ask about. Never respond with "I don't know" or "this never happened to me." Make sure you're providing either a solution to how you would find out the answer to that question, or how you would find out how to navigate that situation, or sharing something similar that can still speak to that skill set that you would need to navigate a situation like that. Don't speak poorly about past or present employers or coworkers or teammates or whoever it is. Don't falsify your answers. Make sure you close the interview, and make sure that you're following up at the end. All really important. That is about it for us, but I wanted to check in and see if there are any questions from anyone regarding anything we looked at today. Any questions that you've stumbled on during interviews in the past that you want help with navigating, anything else that I can help with regarding behavioral interviews. Good way to follow up. Yeah, good question. So definitely by email, whoever it is that you connected with, send them a follow-up email just to thank them again. You can also follow up with them. Say you have an interview and then a week goes by and you haven't heard, and they said that it would only be a week in order to hear back about next steps. Follow up with them via email. If you don't have everyone's contact info, you can always just, so say it's always through the recruiter that you're getting these, the correspondence and organization of the interviews, but there's other people on the panel that you want to thank. Just send them the follow-up and then ask them to pass it on to the other panelists because you don't have their contact info. But definitely recommend email. How do we address a gap in our resume? Depends, that's different for everyone. What I can say is that, I mean, with us being in a global pandemic, there's a lot of gaps on resumes. A lot of people were displaced from their jobs. That's something that employers understand. It really does depend on what the gap is and how much you're comfortable with sharing. So whether it was because of COVID, or maybe you took some time off for family situations, things like that. It depends on what your situation is. Be as honest as you're comfortable with being, and make sure that you tell them, like, hey, this was the reason, if you're comfortable with sharing the reason, but now I'm fully committed to rejoining the workforce. I'm looking for full-time or part-time work, whatever it is, and I'm totally committed to my role now, and I'm ready to get back into it, kind of thing. An example of a message that you can send. So for the follow-up, I'm assuming, Clive, you're asking about again, just a quick note to say, thank you so much for interviewing, taking the time to learn about my experience and my interest in the role. I really enjoyed chatting with yourself and the other panelists about the role and your company. This is a really exciting opportunity. I look forward to hearing back from you about next steps. Something simple like that, just to thank them and restate your interest. Oh, yeah, sure. I'll pull up the STAR method slide again. I saw that was a request there. So that one's there for you. Who would typically be doing the behavioral interview, hiring manager, recruiter, and how are they scored? Good question. So that's dependent on the company. Sometimes the recruiter during that very first session might ask like 1 or 2 behavioral interview questions. Hiring managers, definitely. It depends on the company though. If it's a smaller company, it's a startup, they might not necessarily have a full HR team, which means that you might be working with the CEO or the head of the department that you're applying to, and they might be doing the behavioral interview. So it depends on the company. Anyone could be doing it though. How are they scored? Also depends on the company. What I've seen in the past sometimes is that some interviewers will just take note of your answer and then they'll highlight pieces that are really important to them, different skills that they hear from you that are really important. That's why it's so important to look at the job description and make sure that you're pulling the skills from there and then highlighting them throughout your answers, because they want to hear some of those keywords a lot of the time. Some people even score it like out of 10 kind of thing, and then they add it all up. I had one employer who was scoring the students' interviews based on communication, ambition, and their technical ability, and he was scoring them out of 10 and then giving them an average. And he actually ended up hiring a lot of people who had higher communication skills and technical. And again, because he said, I can train the technical, but it's really hard to train that communication, and I would rather people were coming with that. So sometimes you'll see some of that. Can we have a copy of this PowerPoint? Alice, if you connect with me on LinkedIn, my LinkedIn is just Zoe McGhie. You can find me there. I can share some tips and I can share some of the slides with you. Should I send any email after getting a rejection email? Depends on what kind of rejection email it is. Sometimes the rejection email is just a really standard blast that goes out to everybody. So sometimes when you get a rejection email, it's not even someone typing out an email to you. It's just an automatic message once they close the posting to say, you know, send to everyone except this one person because that person was hired. So if you can tell that it's actually coming from an actual person and not just a do not reply email address, then yeah, send them a response to their rejection email. Ask them for feedback. That's always a great way to learn about your interview skills and to learn more about how you can improve and what they're looking for. Sorry, just lost the question. In the rejection email, yeah, and ask them for more feedback. And if you get one of those rejection emails and it's coming to you, but it's just an automated message, see if you can reach out to the recruiter, see if you can find a recruiter on LinkedIn, anything like that, and ask them if they would be open to chatting with you about your application. Yes, anyone is welcome to add me on LinkedIn, no problem. Can you confirm if we have a copy of the presentation? Yeah, if you connect with me, I can share some of it with you. What's your take on the strengths and weaknesses question? I do know you want to outline some sort of weakness and then back it up with something positive, but what would you recommend to everyone? Yeah, that's always a tricky one. With the weakness one, again, see it as an opportunity. So that's a really difficult question to answer sometimes. When you're answering the weakness question, be honest, be vulnerable. Again, everybody has one. Share what you just would identify your weakness as, and then make sure you share how it is you're working towards overcoming that weakness and either turning it into a strength or eliminating it. What kind of steps are you taking to getting past that? So for example, if your weakness is public speaking or presentations, maybe talk to them about how you practice with family and friends, or you practice with small groups, or you sign up for Toastmasters or something like that. What are you doing to practice so that you are more comfortable with that and it's no longer a weakness for you? That's really what they want to hear. What kind of self-improvement are you doing? What would you do if the job description is not matched with your work experience, but you can do it if having a chance? Definitely connect with someone. Network with as many people as possible. You're gonna have a better chance of actually being given the opportunity to interview. The more people that you connect with and the more people you tell your story to and the more people you talk to about your skill set and why you can do that job. Just hitting apply with your resume is not going to be enough for you. You have to get yourself in front of someone who's working there. So making sure that you connect with someone who, again, you can share your story with, you can prove to them why you'd be a good fit for this job and why they should give you a chance. So it's going to be a little bit more challenging, but find as many people on LinkedIn as you can that you can connect with. Ask them for a couple minutes for a coffee chat or an informational interview. Explain to them like, hey, I'm super interested in your company. This is a really cool role. I think that I would be excellent at it. This is why I think I'd be a good fit. I really wanted to connect with you to share my story and see where it goes from there. STAR method works, tested and landed an offer. Awesome, congrats. Cool, and you're so welcome. We are very close to the 3:30 mark, but again, I just want to say thank you to everyone who attended. Please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn if you have questions following this, or if you want to chat more about getting the presentation slides and things like that. But yeah, thank you everyone for joining, and good luck in your interviews and with your job search. No problem, everyone.
I wanted to jump on quickly and say thanks for presenting again today. It was great to have you back. So just to let everyone know, so our main stage panel is actually about to go live in just about a minute, and then that will go until 4 o'clock and wrap up the event. Thanks again, Zoe. That was really great.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks. Bye.